Hey, what is up everybody? It's Animac here for Anime Uproar, and most of the conversations about villains in MHA revolve around Shigaraki and All for One. But the truth is that the most messed up and unhinged villain in the entire series is probably Dabi, also known as Toya Todoroki. In some ways, he is the product of his tragic family history. But in other ways, it is his own behavior and his own obsession that makes him perhaps the most ruthless and dangerous villain in all of MHA. In this video, I will explain the secret truth about Dabi, how he became a villain, and how his rage and obsession is about to drive him to destroy his entire family, himself included. You guys know the drill. If you enjoy our MHA videos and you want to see more in the future, leave a quick like and comment right now. It only takes you a second, but it really helps me with that YouTube algorithm. And if you are one of the over 50% of people who watch our videos but still haven't subscribed yet, please take the time to subscribe right now. It is completely free, and it's the only way for you to make sure that you're going to see more MHA videos from us in the future. Finally, this video will contain MHA manga spoilers, so please proceed with caution. You have been warned. When we first meet Dabi in chapter 57 of the story, he is introduced as just another disenfranchised villain who was inspired by Stain's ideology to fight against the hypocrisy of the hero society by joining up with the League of Villains. That doesn't tell us much about Dabi's background, other than the fact that something may have happened in his life which led him to conclude that the hero society is corrupt and that it must be overthrown. We also know that Dabi is extremely determined to keep his real name a secret, to the point that he is even willing to fight Shigaraki to the death rather than just revealing it. But that was all the way back in chapter 68. Hundreds of chapters later, we know pretty much everything there is to know about Dabi's past, including his real name and the truth about his family. We also know how he went from being a hopeful kid who just wanted to become a hero and make his father proud, to one of the most disturbed and ruthless villains in the entire story. Dabi's real name is of course Toya Todoroki. He is the eldest son of the #1 pro hero Endeavor and the older brother of Shoto. He also has two other younger siblings, Fuyumi and Natsuo. The Todoroki family is an old and prestigious family, and they appear to have been highly respected even before Enji became the family patriarch. However, as Enji manifested an incredibly strong flame quirk, and as he began climbing the top pro hero charts, the prestige of the Todorokis climbed along with him. Once it became clear that Endeavor would eventually replace All Might as the #1 pro hero, other families began to see the advantage of forming an alliance with the Todorokis through marriage. The Himura family was one of those families. Enji Todoroki spent most of his life trying to surpass All Might as the #1 pro hero, but he could never achieve this goal. He became so frustrated by his inability to overtake All Might that he decided to set up a quirk marriage with the Himura family. If he couldn't surpass All Might, then he would produce a child with the perfect overpowered quirk, and this child would one day become stronger than All Might. The Himura family had a daughter by the name of Rei, and Rei's father convinced her to marry Enji for the good of the family, even though she barely knew her future husband. Enji chose Rei to be his wife not out of love, but because he believed that her quirk was a perfect pairing for his own quirk. Rei had a powerful ice-based quirk, and Enji had a powerful flame-based quirk, so Enji believed that the perfect combination of these two would produce the ultimate power. Rei agreed to the marriage out of a sense of obligation to her family. And this idea of a quirk marriage is a fascinating concept and something that is unique to the world of Boku no Hero. The clear analogy in our own world would be like a political marriage where two families join together in order to increase their wealth and influence, regardless of whether the two people getting married actually wanted to be together. The marriage itself is not about love, it is about the political and monetary interest of the families. A quirk marriage is also about interest, but the focus is on creating offspring with the best possible quirks. I think that this idea of a quirk marriage is a really good addition to the story because realistically, if quirks were real in our own world, this type of marriage would definitely be a thing. It just feels real and plausible within the context of that world, and of course, this type of marriage comes with its own unique set of challenges and hardships. Enji and Rei would eventually have 4 children. The eldest was a son named Toya, who inherited Enji's flame-based quirk. And then they had a daughter named Fuyumi, who inherited her mother's ice-based quirk. After that, they had Natsuo, who also inherited his mother's ice-based quirk. And finally, they had Shoto, who, as we know, was born with the perfect combination of both fire and ice, and the overpowered quirk named half hot, half cold. Shoto's quirk is exactly the type of power that Enji had in mind when he embarked upon his quirk marriage. And so once Shoto's powers manifested, Enji decided to turn Shoto into the hero who would one day surpass All Might. Enji eventually separated Shoto from his siblings and forced him to undergo rigorous training. And in his obsession to turn Shoto into the future #1 pro hero, Enji neglected the rest of his children. Early on in the series, this is pretty much all we knew about the Todoroki family. But as the manga continued, we learned a lot more about the Todorokis, and especially about Endeavor's eldest son, Toya. Toya was actually born with an incredibly strong flame-based quirk. Even though it was not the crazy combination of fire and ice that Shoto possesses, Enji readily acknowledged that Toya's quirk was even stronger than his own, and Enji genuinely believed that Toya did have the potential to surpass All Might as the #1 pro hero. But if that's the case, then why did Enji focus all of his attention on Shoto while neglecting Toya, even though Toya did have the potential to do exactly what Enji wanted? The answer lies in the specific way that Enji's and Rei's quirks combined within Toya. Although he inherited his father's flame-based quirk, and although his flame-based quirk was actually stronger than Enji's, Toya's body did not develop a sufficient resistance to fire. Instead, his body inherited his mother's ability to tolerate extreme cold, but not his father's ability to tolerate extreme heat. This meant that every time Toya used his flame-based quirk, he burned his own body and injured himself. Now, even after noticing this dangerous side effect, Enji still believed that Toya could be the one to surpass All Might. But after Rei and the other children expressed their concern that Toya's training was slowly killing him, Enji finally agreed that Toya cannot be the one to surpass All Might. Enji made this decision not because he didn't like Toya or because he didn't believe in him, but because he actually cared about Toya in his own strange way, and he didn't want his son to keep getting hurt. But by that point, Toya had already set his heart on becoming the future #1 pro hero and surpassing All Might. Enji had awakened that dream within him, and Toya didn't want to give up on his life's dream just because using his quirk burned his own body a little. Toya wanted to keep training, he wanted to keep getting stronger, and he wanted to make his father proud. And so, Toya kept coming home with burns and bruises because he kept training in secret. He clearly wasn't getting the message, so Enji decided to try a tougher approach. Enji told Toya to give up on the idea of being a hero and to just focus on other things like his sister Fuyumi and his brother Natsuo were already doing. Enji said this for Toya's own good. If Toya gives up on being a hero, he won't have to deal with a lifetime of agony as he is forced to burn himself over and over again just so he can use his quirk. However, when his own father forced him to give up on his dream, Toya was crushed. It made him feel inadequate and worthless, and it made him jealous of his younger brother Shoto. Shoto was now his father's favored candidate for surpassing All Might, and this was extremely painful for Toya because he still wanted to be the one to make his father's dream come true. Eventually, this led Toya to lose it. Desperate to get his father's attention and to regain his favor, Toya blew up at the family and tried to hurt baby Shoto. After this, Enji decided to separate Shoto from the other children and to just train him in isolation. He did this to protect Shoto from another potential attack by Toya, but all this did was separate Shoto from the rest of the family while also making Toya even more upset. Since Enji now spent most of his time alone with Shoto, the other children felt neglected by their father, and this was especially true for Toya. Toya felt rejected and abandoned, and he desperately wanted to get his father's attention and approval. And so, just as Enji had been absolutely obsessed with surpassing All Might for many years, Toya became absolutely obsessed with achieving his father's dream, even if his father wouldn't help him do it. At this point, Toya seemed to have concluded that mastering his quirk and becoming a hero is his only purpose in life, and he continued to train more and more until the color of his flames eventually changed from red to blue. During his training, Toya also realized that the power of his flames is directly connected to his emotions. And so when his emotions were out of control, his flames could also spiral out of control. After his flames changed color and became stronger, Toya regained a bit of his confidence, and he decided to show his new power to his father. He invited ℂ𝕂𝔻𝕻 to come to ℂ𝕂𝕗 Peak during the holiday break because he wanted to show his father that his flames are now blue and even more powerful than they were before. But ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 decided not to go to ℂ𝕂𝕗 Peak at the scheduled time. He believed that if he showed up, he would be encouraging his son to keep hurting himself, so he decided not to go in the hopes that this would finally convince Toya to give up on being a hero. But of course, this devastated a young 13-year-old Toya, and while sitting up alone on ℂ𝕂𝕗 Peak, he began to cry. After being rejected by his father yet again, he became intensely emotional, and because his quirk is directly connected to his emotions, Toya's entire body suddenly burst into flames. Toya lost control of his own flames, which led to a massive fire that scorched the entire hill. A fragment of Toya's jawbone was later found on the scene, and Toya was presumed to have perished in the flames. ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 and ℂ𝕂𝕻's eldest son was dead, and ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻's neglect and harsh parenting style were partially to blame for this tragic loss. The entire family was devastated, including ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 himself. Even though he was nowhere close to a good father, he did genuinely care for all his children, including Toya. In the early stages of the story, this doesn't necessarily appear to be the case, but as the story progressed, we realized that ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 does care for his children in his own strange way. But instead of learning from his mistakes after Toya's apparent death, ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 fell even deeper into his obsession. In an attempt to get his mind off of Toya and his own sense of guilt, ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 doubled down on training Shoto to one day surpass All Might. And this led to an even greater divide within the Todoroki family. Eventually, ℂ𝕂𝕻's mental health deteriorated. She simply could not cope with the loss of her son and the obsessive ruthlessness of her husband at the same time, and she snapped. One day, while she was talking on the phone, she was surprised by the sudden appearance of a young Shoto. The left side of Shoto's face triggered a traumatic episode because it reminded her so much of ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻, and she proceeded to throw boiling water at Shoto, permanently scarring his face. Now, as soon as the incident occurred, ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 immediately regretted it. She didn't do this intentionally. She was not in her right mind at that moment. And right after it happened, she did her best to care for Shoto's wounds. But even though she didn't mean to do this, the damage was done, and ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 was eventually committed to a mental institution. For his part, Shoto did not blame his mother for what happened. He blamed his father for traumatizing his mother to the extent that she became mentally unstable. As we know, Shoto's resentment towards his father would continue for years, and at the beginning of the story, Shoto still hated his father so much that he refused to use the flame side of his quirk. Shoto's brother Natsuo also felt a similar type of resentment towards ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻, while their sister Fuyumi seems to have been a little more forgiving towards their father. But of course, the real problem child of the Todoroki family was Toya, and his story did not end in that fire on ℂ𝕂𝕗 Peak. In chapter 350 of the manga, we finally figured out what really happened to Toya on ℂ𝕂𝕗 Peak and how he became the ruthless villain known as Dabi. 11 years ago, Toya did nearly burn to death on ℂ𝕂𝕗 Peak, but before he died, he was rescued by none other than ℂ𝕂𝕗. After the flames engulfed Toya's body, the boy was fiercely determined to survive because he wanted so desperately to show his father what he could do. He wanted so desperately to impress Endeavor with his abilities and to finally make his father proud. And because Toya continued to cling to life, ℂ𝕂𝕗 was able to locate him and take him away to a secret location. Now, even though he was still alive, Toya was severely injured, and he actually spent 3 full years in a coma. Toya finally wakes up inside what appears to be some sort of children's hospital that is also like a weird school. There are other children at this facility, and when Toya wakes up, the children call him Mr. Sleepyhead. The entire scene is very surreal. There are children's arts and crafts all over the walls, and the vibe in general is very friendly, except we all know there is something scary going on just beneath the surface. Oh, and there's another thing here that is incredibly weird. Toya's entire body was apparently severely burned, and his face was completely burned off. But when he wakes up, his burns seem to have been healed, and his face looks practically normal. Like, yes, he has some stitches and scars, but otherwise he looks a lot better than anyone was expecting him to look. Toya has no idea where he is, and when he speaks, he is surprised by his own voice. His voice seems different than it was before. Again, Toya has no idea what happened to him, and the last thing he remembers is burning up in the fire on Sekoto Peak. He decides that he has to go back home, and he tells himself that Endeavor was probably just too busy to come that day on Sekoto Peak, but everyone must be worried sick about him and he needs to apologize to his mom and everyone else for disappearing for 3 years. At this point, it is clear that despite what happened on Sekoto Peak, Toya is still determined to earn his father's approval. Even after being in a coma for 3 years, Toya is still the same boy who just wants to make his father proud. However, a voice from a computer then begins to speak to Toya, and it says that Toya's plans to return home are no longer possible. We don't actually see who is speaking from the computer, the screen is just completely dark, but we can assume that it's either ℂ𝕂𝕁 or Ujiko. The voice explains that Toya's body was burned down to almost nothing, and the procedure of putting his body back together was an extreme one, and it involved a lot of experimental procedures, including grafting regenerative tissue onto him in order to restore his burnt skin. The voice goes on to state that Toya won't be able to use his quirk like he did before. He has damaged multiple organs, his nervous system is impaired, and he won't be able to feel pain normally anymore. Essentially, his perception of pain has been dulled. On top of that, his body apparently became weaker overall, and he will never be the same again. The voice then provokes Toya by calling him a failure. He is a failure because the procedure couldn't bring him back to his full strength. But when Toya hears those words, he is reminded of his father and how his father treated him. As a result, he becomes visibly upset. Nevertheless, the voice on the computer does say that Toya may be able to get his firepower back to what it was before, but only if he stays in this facility with the other children. The true purpose of this facility was essentially to groom children to become spare vessels for ℂ𝕂𝕁 in case his top choice, Tenko Shimura, aka Tomura Shigaraki, failed to meet his expectations for whatever reason. It seems that Toya had been a candidate to become a spare vessel because of the insane power of his quirk, but the deterioration of his body due to his inability to resist his own flames made him a failed candidate. Either way though, Ujiko and the villains could not manipulate Toya into staying. He was already completely driven by his obsession with earning his father's approval, that it seemed to be his sole driving force in life, and so he refused to remain in the facility. When they tried to keep him there by force, Toya unleashed his quirk, burned the facility down, and escaped. Ujiko would later remark that Toya, aka Dabi, is far worse than the heroes can even imagine. He is so unhinged that even the villains couldn't keep him under control. Ujiko also doesn't know how Dabi managed to survive as long as he did, because apparently, after waking up and still choosing to keep using his quirk, his body shouldn't have lasted even a month. And yet, Toya's obsession with his father kept him tethered to this world, and he continued to cling to life. When he escaped the facility, Toya actually went back to the Todoroki family home. He entered the house without being noticed, and while there, he saw Endeavor training with Shoto. Not only that, but Endeavor was being harsh and cruel with Shoto, as if he had learned nothing from the tragedy that happened to Toya. This made Toya think that his father had already moved on from him. He was busy training Shoto now, and it was like Toya had never even existed. Toya didn't even matter because Shoto was the new star of the show, and the entire family had simply moved on from Toya. And not only that, but what happened to Toya didn't even make Endeavor stop and think twice before putting his children through so much suffering. Shoto just became the new Toya in Endeavor's mind, Toya was replaced and forgotten, and all of this made Toya feel even worse. In fact, it drove him to completely snap and abandon his old identity as Toya for his new identity as the villain, Dabi. But we know that things weren't actually as simple as Toya had made them out to be in his mind. Toya's mother never got over what happened to him, and neither did his siblings. Even Endeavor was devastated by the loss, but because he didn't know what else to do with his grief, he channeled everything into training Shoto. This was obviously a mistake and a terrible way to deal with tragedy, and Shoto suffered even more because of it. ℂ𝕂𝕻 certainly made many mistakes, and he did many bad things. So Toya does have a right to be mad, but Toya doesn't know the full story. He is jumping to conclusions based on a few observations, but he doesn't know what has been happening with the Todoroki family for the 3 years that he had been in a coma. After witnessing what he believed to be evidence that his family had just forgotten him and moved on, Toya finally stopped being obsessed with making ℂ𝕂𝕻 proud. Unfortunately, he merely replaced that obsession with an obsession for revenge against ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻. He disappeared once again, allowing his family to believe that he was dead, and then he spent all his time trying to make his flames stronger without any regard for the damage that he was doing to his own body. He also carefully studied all of ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻's actions as a top pro hero in order to learn all of his moves and all of his strengths and weaknesses. This is the point at which Toya truly died and Dabi was born, and it happened more than 3 years after the fire on Sekoto Peak. ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 would later explain to the police that Dabi is a completely different type of villain from someone like ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻. ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 is a master strategist who wants to avoid death and live forever. Dabi is an obsessed berserker driven by revenge, and he will gladly embrace death if it will allow him to fulfill his desire for vengeance. Unlike ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻, Dabi is self-destructive and insane, and he is willing to burn the entire world to the ground, including himself, just to get back at his father. Dabi eventually reappeared about 8 years after he broke out of the facility, and that is when he joined up with the League of Villains. Dabi knew from the start that ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 and ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 were the ones who saved his life, and he even implies that he was kept alive using the same technology that was used to create the Nomu. This led me to speculate that Dabi may be some sort of human Nomu hybrid. Someone whose body has been manipulated in the same way that the bodies of the Nomu are, but whose transformation into a Nomu wasn't completed, and so his mind wasn't affected. This would explain why Dabi's body still hasn't been destroyed, even though he uses incredibly overpowered flames without having a resistance to those flames. Dabi's ability to withstand damage and tolerate pain are far beyond the level of a normal human, but it's also clear that his mind is not the mind of a Nomu, and he cannot be brainwashed and controlled like a Nomu can. So he may well be some sort of human Nomu hybrid, but this hasn't been confirmed just yet. Along with this revelation that Dabi's body was subject to procedures similar to the process of creating Nomu, ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 also states that a major reason why Dabi's body has managed to overcome death is his superhuman obsession with getting revenge against ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻. His body continues to burn over and over again, but it is somehow being held together by the flames of vengeance. This is kind of like Dabi's version of plus ultra, of going beyond and surpassing his limits, but not in the name of becoming a hero or rescuing others, but in the name of making his father suffer. In his pursuit of revenge, Dabi can be both strategic and calculating, and absolutely wild and ruthless at the same time. We saw the strategic side of him when he released a pre-recorded tape of himself exposing ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 along with the truth about Toya to all of Japan at a critical moment during the Battle of Jakku. He knows that his father worked hard all his life to become the #1 pro hero, and now that he achieved that rank, it definitely means a lot to him. So Dabi then releases that tape because he wants to take the joy away from his father. He wants to make him look bad in front of the entire country and make everyone lose respect for the #1 pro hero. But although Dabi clearly has that strategic premeditated side to him, his wild, ruthless, and revenge-obsessed side always seems to win out in the end. In the final arc of the story, we witness Dabi completely lose control, and we see his entire body engulfed in flames as he assumes the appearance of a terrifying, flaming corpse. He looks like a burning Nomu whose sole purpose is to burn down everything around him, even at the price of his own life. He vows to burn everything precious to ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 down to the ground, and that will serve as proof that he existed. That will be Dabi's revenge for the fact that his father forgot him and replaced him with Shoto. He will kill Shoto. He will kill all the heroes, and then he will kill ℂ𝕂𝕻𝕻 himself before his own body is also consumed by his own flames. He will stop at nothing to accomplish his revenge, and he will sacrifice everything for that one single purpose. And in the end, this is just so sad and so ironic. Dabi became who he is today because his father Enji was obsessed with surpassing All Might. And this obsession drove Enji to mistreat his family, including Toya, and this eventually led Toya to crumble under all that pressure and lose control of his own flames on Sekoto Peak. So in the first half of his life, Toya witnessed his father's obsession completely consume his entire family and tear them all apart. But then, in the second half of his life, Toya also allowed an obsession to completely consume him. Only it wasn't his father's obsession to surpass All Might, but rather his own twisted obsession with getting the most brutal revenge on his father. He is so determined to make his father suffer that he is even willing to kill his own sibling Shoto, even though Shoto himself did nothing wrong. Shoto's innocence doesn't matter to Dabi because he just wants to see the look on Endeavor's face when his favorite child dies. Ironically, both Dabi and the man he hates the most, his father, are men whose lives were consumed and destroyed by obsession. The only difference is the type of obsession that each of them succumbed to. In the end, it looks like Dabi will probably go out in a mad blaze of glory. It seems that he will push his body to the limit in his relentless pursuit of revenge, and he will try to take down Endeavor while also sacrificing his own life in the process. He may also take down a bunch of other heroes and villains along the way, and if he did, he wouldn't even care. All that matters to him is his mission. All that matters to him is his revenge. In some ways, Dabi is just a dark mirror image of Endeavor. Someone who is willing to burn everyone around him, even his own family, in the fanatical pursuit of his obsession. As Ujiko said, Dabi is possibly the most dangerous villain of all because he doesn't want to take over the world or become immortal or anything like that. He wants to go out in a blaze of glory while exacting his revenge, and that is the only thing that matters to him. And that is what makes him so messed up and so terrifying. He is a fanatic who doesn't even think about his own self-interest or self-preservation. The vast majority of human beings are pursuing their self-interests and self-preservation, and that is something that everyone can understand. It's a basic human instinct. But Dabi is different. Dabi is obsessed and fanatical. He's like a modern-day kamikaze. And that is the truly terrifying thing about him. You can't relate to him, you can't understand him, you can't predict his actions because his thought process is so different from that of a normal human. And that includes both the typical heroes and the typical villains. Dabi is like a ruthless force of nature. You can't reason with him, you can't negotiate with him, and you just have to hope that you can get out of his way before he madly scorches everything around him. And whether you like him or fear him, this makes him an incredibly memorable villain. If you are looking for a video to watch next, check out my recent video on why Deku's quirk might be secretly killing him, and it's not what you think. Link in the description. Let me know what you guys think about Dabi. Is he the most effed up villain in MHA? And if not, then who do you think is most worthy of that crown? Toga, Twice, Shigaraki? Leave your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed this MHA video and you want to see more in the future, leave a quick like and comment right now. It only takes you a second, but it helps me out a lot with that YouTube algorithm. And if you're one of the over 50% of people who watch our videos regularly but haven't taken the time to subscribe yet, do me a big favor and make this the video that you subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications. You might have watched a few of our videos recently and so YouTube is recommending them to you, but if you don't subscribe, eventually you're not gonna see them anymore and you're gonna miss out on a lot. You can also hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at @AnimeUproar. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, see ya, Space Cowboys!